My name is Cassandra Brooks, and I'm 34 years old. What I'm about to tell you will sound impossible, but every word is true. Before I reveal how I served my parents their own eviction papers at our family's annual Christmas dinner, let me take you back to where it all began, with a single manila envelope that would change everything I thought I knew about my family. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning in September, addressed to me at my law office in downtown Seattle. Inside was a document that made my hands shake as I read it, a piece of paper that would become the weapon I needed to finally claim my place at a table where I'd never been welcome. What I didn't know was that this discovery would align perfectly with the investigation I'd been conducting in secret for months. You see, my parents, Richard and Margaret Brooks, own the most prestigious catering company in the Pacific Northwest. Brooks and Associates have been serving Seattle's elite for over 20 years, and our family dinners were legendary productions, complete with Waterford crystal, sterling silver, and enough pretension to suffocate anyone who dared question the established order. But there was one rule that never changed. I was there to serve, never to sit. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Like no matter what you accomplished, you'd always be seen as the help rather than the heir? I'd love to hear your story if you have one, because what happened next might resonate with anyone who's ever been underestimated by the people who should have believed in them most. While my older brother Marcus was groomed to take over the business, and my younger sister Victoria was celebrated for her marriage to a Microsoft executive, I was expected to pour wine and clear plates. Cassandra, serve our drinks, became the soundtrack of every family gathering. Never mind that I was a corporate attorney with my own practice specializing in real estate law. Never mind that I'd graduated summa cum laude from Harvard Law School. At the Brooks family table, I was nothing more than unpaid staff in a designer dress. You don't belong at this table, my father would say whenever I tried to join the conversation about business or investments. You belong in the kitchen, making sure our guests are comfortable. His words cut deeper each time, but I'd learned to smile and nod, biding my time until I could prove my worth in a way that would silence him forever. The document in that envelope was about to change everything, but I had no idea how perfectly it would align with what I'd been planning for months. You see, I'd been quietly investigating something that would shake our family to its core. The secret I'd uncovered was so explosive that it would transform me from the family disappointment into the one holding all the cards. My parents had built their empire on a foundation of lies, deception, and illegal activities that stretched back to the very beginning of their business. I was about to pull that foundation right out from under them, but first, I had to endure one more Christmas dinner as their servant. Little did they know, this would be the last time they'd ever ask me to serve anything. The morning of December 24th arrived with the kind of bitter Seattle rain that seemed to mirror my mood perfectly. I stood in my downtown apartment, staring at the elegant black dress hanging in my closet, the same dress I'd worn to serve at family dinners for the past 5 years. But this time, I had something else in my briefcase, a stack of legal documents that would turn their perfect Christmas into their worst nightmare. As I drove toward the family estate in Bellevue, that manila envelope's contents burned in my memory. The truth about how my parents had acquired their precious catering business was about to come to light, and with it, the revelation that would finally give me the revenge I'd been planning for years. What I didn't realize was that this Christmas dinner would become the most satisfying moment of my entire life. The Brooks family estate sat on 3 acres of perfectly manicured grounds, its Tudor-style architecture designed to impress visiting clients and intimidate family members who dared to step out of line. As I pulled into the circular driveway, I could see the catering trucks already positioned near the service entrance, ready to transform our home into another showcase of my parents' success. But tonight, I wasn't arriving as the dutiful daughter ready to serve champagne and smile politely at condescending relatives. Tonight, I was arriving as an attorney with evidence that could destroy everything my parents had built. The manila envelope had given me the final piece of a puzzle I'd been working on for 8 months, and now I was ready to flip the script on a family that had never valued me. Walking up the stone pathway to the front entrance, I could hear the familiar sounds of preparation inside, crystal glasses clinking, silverware being arranged, and my mother's voice directing the staff she'd hired for the evening. The irony wasn't lost on me that she'd hired professional servers for this dinner, yet would still expect me to work alongside them, unpaid and unappreciated. I pushed open the heavy oak door and stepped into the foyer, where the smell of pine from the massive Christmas tree mixed with the aroma of expensive perfume and catered hors d'oeuvres. The house was decorated like a magazine spread, garland draped along the mahogany banister, gold ribbon wound through the crystal chandelier, and enough poinsettias to stock a nursery. "Cassandra, finally!" my mother called from the dining room. "I was beginning to think you'd forgotten about us. Come help me with the wine selection. We have the Hendersons coming tonight, and you know how particular they are about their vintages." Margaret Brooks appeared in the doorway, resplendent in a burgundy silk dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage. At 62, she'd maintained the kind of polished appearance that came from regular spa treatments and the confidence that money could buy. Her silver hair was swept into an elegant chignon, and her jewelry sparkled under the foyer's lighting. "Hello, Mother," I said, setting my briefcase down carefully beside the antique console table. "I brought something special for tonight's dinner." She barely glanced at me, already turning back toward the dining room. "Whatever it is, it can wait. We need to get the bar set up, and your father wants to make sure the champagne is properly chilled. The Hendersons are bringing their son, the one who just made partner at his firm, and we want to make a good impression. The same old story. Another successful young professional for them to fawn over while I remained invisible. But tonight, I had something that would make me impossible to ignore. I followed her into the dining room, where the table was set for 12 with our finest china and enough silverware to serve a small army. The room looked like something out of Architectural Digest, with its coffered ceiling, Persian rugs, and oil paintings that my parents had collected over the years. Everything was perfect, polished, and designed to remind everyone of the Brooks family's success and status. "Cassandra, start with the champagne flutes," my mother instructed, not bothering to look at me as she adjusted a flower arrangement. "And make sure they're spotless." I found water spots on the glasses last time, and it was embarrassing. "Of course, Mother," I replied, but inside I was smiling. Soon, she'd be the one embarrassed. Soon, she'd discover that the daughter she dismissed and diminished had been playing a much longer game than she'd ever imagined. My father emerged from his study, looking distinguished in his navy suit and Harvard tie, a not-so-subtle reminder of the pedigree he'd worked so hard to cultivate. Richard Brooks was a man who'd built his identity around appearances, and tonight's dinner was another opportunity to showcase the family's success to their social circle. "Cassandra," he said, his tone already dismissive, "I trust you'll be helpful tonight. We have important guests coming, and I need you to stay in the background where you belong. No interrupting conversations, no trying to insert yourself into business discussions. Just serve the drinks and keep quiet." "Actually, Dad," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins, "I think tonight's going to be very different from what you're expecting." He looked at me with the same condescending expression I'd seen 1,000 times before. "Just do what you're told, Cassandra. For once in your life, try not to disappoint us." Little did he know that before this evening was over, I would be the one serving papers instead of champagne, and the disappointment would be entirely theirs. The first guests began arriving at 7 o'clock sharp, just as they had for the past 15 years of Christmas dinners at the Brooks estate. I watched from the kitchen as my parents transformed into their public personas, warm, gracious hosts who seemed to genuinely care about everyone in their orbit. If only these people knew what my parents were really like behind closed doors. Marcus arrived first with his wife Jennifer and their 2 children, looking every inch the successful heir apparent in his tailored suit and confident smile. At 38, my older brother had inherited all of my father's charm and none of his cruelty, which made him the perfect candidate to eventually take over Brooks and Associates. He greeted our parents with the kind of affection I'd always envied, receiving hugs and compliments while I remained invisible in the background. "Cassandra's here too," Marcus said, finally noticing me arranging champagne glasses on silver trays. "How's the law practice going, sis?" Before I could answer, my father interjected. "She's helping us tonight, as usual. You know how Cassandra likes to stay busy." The dismissal was subtle but clear. My career was just a hobby compared to the real work of serving at family functions. Victoria arrived next with her husband David, both of them glowing from their recent vacation to the Maldives. My younger sister had always been the family favorite, blessed with natural beauty and the good sense to marry well. At 31, she'd never worked a day in her life, but my parents treated her like a princess simply because she'd chosen the right husband. "Cassie," she squealed, using the nickname that always made me cringe. "You look so serious tonight. Are you okay?" "I'm perfect," I replied, and for the first time in years I meant it. Tonight, I would finally reveal the truth that had been burning inside me for months. The manila envelope had given me the last piece of evidence I needed, but the investigation had started much earlier. It began in April when I was reviewing contracts for one of my real estate clients and noticed something odd about a property transaction from 1998. The address looked familiar. It was the building where my parents had first started Brooks and Associates. According to the public records, the property had been sold under suspicious circumstances, with the previous owner claiming he'd been forced out through fraudulent means. That discovery led me down a rabbit hole of research that consumed my evenings and weekends for months. I pulled property records, business licenses, insurance claims, and bank documents, slowly piecing together a pattern of deception that stretched back to the very foundation of my parents' empire. What I found was shocking. My parents hadn't built their business through hard work and determination, as they'd always claimed. They'd stolen it from a small family-owned catering company called Russo's Kitchen, using forged documents, false insurance claims, and intimidation tactics that would have made a mob boss proud. The Russo family had owned and operated their catering business for 3 generations before my parents systematically destroyed them. Through a series of legal maneuvers that bordered on criminal, Richard and Margaret Brooks had forced the Russos into bankruptcy, then swooped in to buy their client list, equipment, and reputation for pennies on the dollar. But the manila envelope had revealed something even more damaging. My parents were about to lose everything anyway. The building that housed Brooks and Associates, the same building they'd stolen from the Russos, was being sold to developers, and my parents had exactly 30 days to vacate the premises. The irony was delicious. After spending decades building their empire on someone else's foundation, my parents were about to discover that they'd never actually owned that foundation at all. The manila envelope contained an eviction notice, and as their attorney daughter, I was the one who'd been chosen to serve it. But that wasn't the most satisfying part. The envelope had come from the law firm representing the Russo family's estate. It turned out that old Mr. Russo had never given up his fight for justice, and his grandson had recently hired a team of attorneys to recover what had been stolen from their family. The eviction was just the beginning. There were fraud charges pending, civil suits being filed, and enough evidence to destroy the Brooks family's reputation forever. As I continued arranging glasses and pretending to be the dutiful daughter, I watched my parents hold court in their stolen kingdom. They had no idea that their carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down, and that their despised youngest daughter would be the one to deliver the final blow. The Hendersons arrived fashionably late, bringing their son Michael, the newly minted partner my parents were so eager to impress. Dr. and Mrs. Chin followed shortly after, along with the Washingtons and several other couples from my parents' exclusive social circle. The dining room filled with the sound of clinking glasses, polite laughter, and the kind of small talk that wealthy people use to avoid discussing anything meaningful. "Cassandra, bring the wine." My mother called from her position at the head of the table. "The Bordeaux we discussed earlier." I complied, moving silently between the guests as I'd been trained to do since childhood. But this time, I wasn't just serving wine. I was studying faces, memorizing expressions, preparing for the moment when I would transform from invisible servant to the center of attention. "You know, Richard," Mr. Henderson was saying as I poured his wine, "I was just telling Michael here about how you and Margaret built this business from nothing. It's truly inspiring to see what hard work and integrity can accomplish." My father beamed with pride, raising his glass in a modest toast. "We've been blessed, certainly, but success comes from treating people fairly and never compromising your principles." I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing. If only Mr. Henderson knew what those principles actually entailed. If only any of these people knew that they were celebrating thieves and fraudsters who built their fortune on the ruins of a family they destroyed. But they would know soon enough. The manila envelope was still in my briefcase, along with copies of every document I'd collected during my investigation. In less than an hour, when dinner was served and all eyes were on my parents, I would stand up and reveal the truth that would shatter their perfect world. What I didn't know was that the moment I'd been planning for months would exceed even my wildest expectations. The public humiliation, The shock on their faces, the complete and total vindication, it would all be more satisfying than I'd ever dared to imagine. As the evening progressed and the wine flowed freely, my parents became more animated, regaling their guests with stories of their success and their children's accomplishments. Marcus's business acumen, Victoria's perfect marriage, their grandchildren's achievements, everything except their middle daughter's Harvard law degree and successful practice. "What about Cassandra?" Mrs. Chin asked politely, glancing in my direction as I refilled her water glass. "What is she up to these days?" There was a moment of awkward silence before my father answered. "Oh, Cassandra helps us out when we need it. She's very useful." Useful. Not successful, not accomplished, not proud. Just useful, like a piece of kitchen equipment that served its purpose and was otherwise forgotten. That word would echo in my mind as I prepared to serve them something far more significant than wine or hors d'oeuvres. Soon, I would be serving justice, and it would be the most satisfying meal any of us had ever tasted. Dinner was announced at 8:30, and the guests filed into the dining room with the practiced elegance of people accustomed to formal affairs. The table looked magnificent under the crystal chandelier, with its gleaming china, fresh flowers, and enough silverware to intimidate a debutante. I took my usual position against the wall, ready to refill glasses and clear plates as needed, but my heart was racing with anticipation. The first course arrived, a delicate butternut squash soup that my parents' hired chef had prepared to perfection. As conversations flowed around topics of business, politics, and social events, I found myself studying each guest's face, knowing that within the hour, these same expressions of contentment and admiration would transform into shock and disbelief. "This soup is exceptional, Margaret," Dr. Chin commented, dabbing her lips with the linen napkin. "You simply must give me the recipe." My mother smiled graciously. "Family secret, I'm afraid. We've been serving this particular recipe for over 20 years now. It's one of our signature dishes at Brooks and Associates." Another lie. I knew from my research that the butternut squash soup had been Maria Russo's grandmother's recipe, passed down through 3 generations before my parents stole it along with everything else. Even tonight's menu was built on theft and deception. "Speaking of the business," Mr. Henderson interjected, "I understand you're expanding into corporate catering. That must be quite an undertaking." My father leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying the attention. "We've built something special here, something that will last for generations. It's all about foundation, establishing trust, maintaining quality, never forgetting where you came from." The irony was so thick I could taste it. My parents had forgotten exactly where they came from. They'd buried the truth, so deep they seemed to believe their own lies. But I hadn't forgotten. I'd spent months uncovering every detail of their deception, and now I was ready to remind them of their true origins. "Dad," I said quietly from my position by the sideboard, "speaking of foundations, there's something I need to discuss with you after dinner." He barely glanced in my direction. "Not now, Cassandra. We're entertaining guests. Actually," I continued, my voice growing stronger, "I think it might be relevant to the conversation. It's about the building where Brooks and Associates is located." This got his attention. His fork paused halfway to his mouth, and I saw a flicker of something, concern, fear, cross his features. "We can discuss business matters later. Please continue serving." But the seed was planted. I could see him processing my words, trying to figure out what I might know. Little did he realize that I knew everything. Every forged document, every fraudulent claim, every lie they told to steal the Russo family's legacy. As the second course was served, a perfectly prepared salmon with hollandaise sauce that was also stolen from the Russo family recipes, the conversation turned to real estate investments. Mr. Washington was discussing a recent property acquisition when my mother decided to show off. "Property is everything," she declared, gesturing with her wine glass. "Richard and I learned that early in our careers. We were fortunate enough to acquire our building at exactly the right time, just when the previous owners were ready to move on to other ventures." Move on to other ventures. That was her euphemism for destroying a family's livelihood and forcing them into bankruptcy. The casual way she dismissed the Russo family's suffering made my blood boil, but I maintained my composure. Soon, very soon, she would learn the true cost of that fortunate acquisition. Victoria, perhaps sensing some tension, tried to change the subject. Mom, remember when we were kids and you used to let us help in the kitchen during these dinner parties? Cassie was always so good at arranging the appetizers. She still is, my father said with what might have passed for affection if you didn't know him better. Cassandra has always been our little helper. She knows her place in this family. There was again my place. Always serving, never served. Always in the background, never at the center. But tonight, I would claim my rightful place at this table, and they would never be able to diminish me again. Michael Henderson, the newly minted partner, leaned forward with interest. Are you in the catering business too, Cassandra? Before I could answer, my father jumped in. Oh no, she dabbles in law, but it's more of a hobby really. Nothing as serious as what you do, Michael. Mostly small-time real estate work, contract reviews, that sort of thing. Actually, I said, stepping closer to the table, I specialize in property law and fraud investigation. In fact, I've been working on a particularly interesting case involving commercial real estate fraud that goes back over 2 decades. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. My parents exchanged a look that didn't go unnoticed by several guests, and I could see Marcus frowning as he tried to understand the undercurrent of tension. How fascinating, Mrs. Chin said politely. What kind of fraud? The kind where someone uses forged documents and false insurance claims to force legitimate business owners into bankruptcy, then swoops in to steal their property, their client list, and their family recipes. I replied, my voice steady and clear. You could have heard a pin drop. Every conversation stopped. Every fork was suspended in midair, and all eyes turned between me and my parents. My father's face had gone pale, while my mother's carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the flush of panic creeping up her neck. Cassandra, my father said, his voice tight with warning, I think you've had too much wine. Perhaps you should go to the kitchen and help clear the plates. I haven't had any wine, Dad. I've been too busy serving everyone else as usual. But you're right about one thing. It is time to clear some things up. I reached for my briefcase, which I'd strategically placed on the nearby console table. In fact, I have something here that I think everyone should see. Stop! My mother hissed, but it was too late. The manila envelope was already in my hands, and the moment I'd been planning for months was finally here. What I didn't realize was that the next few minutes would exceed even my wildest dreams of vindication. The looks on their faces, the gasps from the guests, the complete and utter transformation from respected hosts to exposed fraudsters, it would all be more satisfying than I'd ever imagined possible. As I opened the envelope and prepared to read its contents aloud, I caught sight of Marcus's confused expression and Victoria's dawning horror. They had no idea what was coming, but they were about to learn that their perfect family was built on a foundation of lies, and their despised sister was the one who discovered the truth. The second suspense breadcrumb was about to be revealed, and with it, the beginning of the end for Richard and Margaret Brooks. Ladies and gentlemen, I announced, my voice carrying across the suddenly silent dining room, I have an announcement to make that I think will interest everyone here, especially those of you who've been celebrating my parents' business success this evening. The manila envelope felt substantial in my hands, not just because of the documents it contained, but because of the weight of justice it represented. 27 years of being dismissed, diminished, and treated like hired help were about to be vindicated in the most public way possible. Cassandra, sit down immediately, my father commanded, his voice sharp with authority. But for the first time in my life, his commands held no power over me. Actually, Dad, I think I'll stand. After all, I've been standing and serving for long enough. I pulled out the first document, the eviction notice that had started this whole revelation. This arrived at my office last week, addressed to me as the registered agent for Brooks and Associates. Apparently, you failed to mention that you'd listed me as your legal representative. My mother's wine glass trembled in her hand. You had no right to open our mail. I had every right, I replied calmly. As your attorney of record, I'm legally obligated to receive and review all official correspondence. And this particular piece of correspondence is quite enlightening. The guests were leaning forward now, sensing drama but not yet understanding its magnitude. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat uncomfortably. Perhaps we should give you some family privacy. No, please stay, I interrupted. After all, you've been celebrating my parents' integrity and hard work all evening. I think you deserve to know the truth about how that success was actually achieved. I held up the eviction notice so everyone could see it. This is a 30-day notice to vacate the premises of 1847 Pike Street, the building that houses Brooks and Associates. The building my parents have been operating from for over 20 years. The building they've always claimed to own. We do own it, my father said, but his voice lacked conviction. Actually, you don't. You never did. And that's just the beginning of the story. I reached into the envelope and pulled out a thick stack of documents. Over the past 8 months, I've been conducting a thorough investigation into the origins of Brooks and Associates. What I discovered would make an excellent case study in corporate fraud. Victoria gasped. Cassie, what are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that our family business was built on the systematic destruction of another family's livelihood. I'm talking about forged documents, fraudulent insurance claims, and intimidation tactics that forced the Russo family, the real founders of what became Brooks and Associates, into bankruptcy. The color drained from my mother's face. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? I pulled out a photograph of the original Russo's kitchen storefront, circa 1995. This is what the business looked like before Mom and Dad got their hands on it. 3 generations of the Russo family had built a successful catering operation, complete with signature recipes, established client relationships, and a stellar reputation in the Seattle food scene. Marcus was staring at the photograph with growing horror. Cassie, what are you saying? I'm saying that everything we've been told about our parents' success is a lie. They didn't build Brooks and Associates from nothing. They stole it from the Russo family and then spent 20 years covering their tracks. I spread several documents across the dining table, pushing aside the fine china and crystal glasses. Here's the timeline. In 1997, the Russo family's insurance company received a series of anonymous tips about supposed health code violations at their facility. The tips were false, but they triggered multiple inspections that disrupted their business operations. My father stood up abruptly. That's enough, Cassandra. You're embarrassing yourself and us. Sit down, Dad. I'm just getting started. My voice had a steel edge that surprised even me. The health department found no violations, but the damage was done. Their reputation was tarnished, and they lost several major contracts. Then, mysteriously, their primary supplier, the one they'd worked with for over a decade, suddenly terminated their relationship, claiming the Russos had defaulted on their payments. I held up another document. Except the Russos never defaulted. Someone had been intercepting their payments and depositing them into a shell company account. Someone who had access to their business information and client list. Someone who had been working as a consultant to help them modernize their operations. The silence in the room was deafening. Even the hired servers had stopped moving, sensing the magnitude of what was being revealed. Mom, I continued, turning to face Margaret Brooks directly. You were that consultant. You gained their trust, learned their business inside and out, and then used that information to destroy them systematically. My mother's hands were shaking now. You have no proof. I have all the proof I need. I pulled out a folder labeled Financial Records 1997 to 1998. Bank statements showing payments from Russo's Kitchen being diverted to M. Brooks Consulting. Insurance forms filed in your name claiming damages to equipment that belonged to the Russos. Even a copy of the lease agreement you signed for their building, while they were still operating in it. Dr. Chun set down her fork with a sharp clink. My God, Margaret, is this true? It gets worse, I said, my voice growing stronger with each revelation. After the Russos were forced into bankruptcy, Mom and Dad swooped in to buy their assets at auction. The building, the equipment, the client list, even the family recipes that had been passed down for generations. They paid approximately 10 cents on the dollar for a business worth hundreds of thousands. I pulled out the final document, the one that would deliver the killing blow. But here's the part that's going to destroy you both. The Russo family never gave up. Old Mr. Russo spent his final years collecting evidence of your fraud, and when he died last year, he left everything to his grandson, including enough documentation to not only expose your crimes but to recover everything you stole. The eviction notice was just the beginning. The Russo family estate was taking back their building, their recipes, their client list, and their reputation. But more than that, they were filing criminal charges for fraud, racketeering, and conspiracy. You see, Mom and Dad, I said, savoring every word. Karma has a way of catching up with people. The family you destroyed is about to destroy you in return. And your despised daughter, the one who doesn't belong at this table, is the one who's going to make sure justice is served. The third suspense breadcrumb was planted. The guests were staring in horror at my parents, who looked like they'd aged 10 years in the past 10 minutes. But I wasn't finished yet. The best part was still to come. The dining room erupted in chaos. Mrs. Henderson dropped her napkin and reached for her purse. "Thomas, I think we should leave." Mr. Washington was already standing, his face a mask of disgust. "Richard, if this is true—" "It's not true," my father shouted, but his voice cracked with desperation. "She's making this up. Cassandra has always been jealous of our success, always trying to undermine." "Jealous?" I laughed, a sound that cut through the room like breaking glass. "Dad, I'm about to become the most successful member of this family, thanks to you and Mom." I reached into my briefcase one more time and pulled out a business card. "You see, when the Russo family's attorneys contacted me to serve the eviction notice, they made me an offer I couldn't refuse. They want to hire me as their lead counsel in the civil suit against Brooks and Associates. The retainer alone is more than I made all last year." Victoria was crying now, tears streaming down her carefully made-up face. "Cassie, how could you do this to us? We're family. Family." The word tasted bitter in my mouth. "When have you ever treated me like family, Victoria? When have any of you ever treated me as anything more than free labor?" Marcus was studying the documents I'd spread across the table, his business mind already calculating the implications. "Jesus Christ, Mom. Dad, what have you done?" "We built an empire," my mother shrieked, her composure finally cracking completely. "We gave you children everything. Private schools, college educations, this house, this lifestyle. Built on stolen ground," I interrupted. "Paid for with stolen money. Everything you gave us was bought with someone else's blood, sweat, and tears." The Hendersons were already at the door, Michael grabbing his coat without ceremony. "This is unconscionable," Dr. Henderson said, not bothering to lower his voice. "Margaret, Richard, I don't know how you can live with yourselves." One by one, the guests began filing out, their faces reflecting a mixture of shock, disgust, and embarrassment at having been associated with the evening's revelations. The carefully orchestrated dinner party, designed to showcase the Brooks family's success and respectability, had become a public execution. "Wait," my father called desperately. "Don't listen to her. She's been drinking. She's not thinking clearly." "I haven't had a drop of alcohol," I said calmly. "Unlike you, I wanted to remember every detail of this moment." Dr. Chin paused at the doorway, turning back to face my parents. "I've known you both for 15 years. I trusted you with my daughter's wedding reception. How many other families have you destroyed? How many other businesses have you stolen?" The question hung in the air like a death sentence. My parents had no answer because there was no answer that wouldn't make things worse. They stood in their ruined dining room, surrounded by the wreckage of their reputation, while their despised daughter held all the cards. But I wasn't finished. The fourth suspense breadcrumb was about to be revealed, and it would destroy any remaining hope they had of salvaging their lives. "Oh, and there's one more thing," I said as the last guests hurried toward the exit. "The criminal investigation isn't just about the Russo family anymore. The FBI has been very interested in your business practices, especially after I provided them with evidence of tax evasion, money laundering, and racketeering spanning over 2 decades. My father's knees buckled, and he had to grab the back of his chair to keep from falling. "The FBI, Special Agent Martinez, has been building a case for months. Apparently, the Russo situation was just the tip of the iceberg. There are at least 6 other families whose businesses you've systematically destroyed over the years. The Chang's Restaurant Supply Company, the Johnson's Event Planning Business, the Kowalski's Bakery. Should I continue?" My mother was hyperventilating now, her face purple with rage and panic. "You vindictive little bitch. After everything we've done for you. What you've done for me." I stepped closer to her, my voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout. "You mean besides humiliating me at every family gathering for 34 years? Besides dismissing my education, my career, my worth as a human being? Besides treating me like unpaid help while celebrating my siblings' every breath?" The hired servers had disappeared into the kitchen, smart enough to avoid becoming witnesses to a family's complete destruction. Only my immediate family remained in the dining room, surrounded by the ruins of their perfect dinner party. Marcus was pale as death, understanding that his inheritance, his entire future, had just evaporated. "Cassie, surely we can work something out. If there are legal issues, we can hire attorneys, make restitution." "With what money?" I laughed coldly. "The FBI has already frozen your assets pending the investigation. The building you operate from will be repossessed by the Russo family within 30 days. Your client list, your recipes, your equipment, everything will be returned to its rightful owners. You have nothing left to bargain with." Victoria was sobbing hysterically now. "Our children! What about our children? Their college funds, their trust accounts." "Also frozen," I confirmed. "But don't worry, Victoria. I'm sure David makes enough at Microsoft to support your lifestyle. Although you might want to start looking for a job yourself. The social circles you've been traveling in won't be very welcoming once word gets out about your family's criminal activities." My father straightened up, some of his old arrogance returning despite his desperate circumstances. "You think you've won something here, Cassandra? You've destroyed your own family. You'll never be able to show your face in Seattle society again." "Seattle society?" I smiled, and I could see my reflection in the dining room mirror, poised, confident, victorious. "Dad, I'm about to become the most celebrated attorney in the Pacific Northwest. The woman who brought down one of the region's most sophisticated fraud operations. The lawyer who got justice for multiple families who thought they'd never see it. My phone has been ringing nonstop with new clients who want the attorney who isn't afraid to take on the powerful and corrupt." The fourth suspense breadcrumb was planted. They could see their complete destruction stretching out before them. Financial ruin, criminal charges, social exile, and the loss of everything they'd built their identities around. But there was still one more revelation coming, one final twist that would make their humiliation complete. Little did they know that in just a few minutes, I would deliver the ultimate vindication that would transform this moment from mere revenge into perfect, poetic justice. As my family stood among the wreckage of their dinner party, something shifted inside me. For 34 years, I had been searching for their approval, desperately trying to earn a place at their table. But standing there with the evidence of their crimes spread before us, I realized I didn't want their table anymore. I had built something better. A career based on truth, justice, and genuine accomplishment rather than theft and deception. "You know what the most beautiful part of all this is?" I said, gathering the documents back into their folder with deliberate care. "For years, you told me I didn't belong at this table. You were right. I belong at a much better table." My phone buzzed with a text message, and I glanced at it with satisfaction. "That's my assistant. She's confirming my interview with 60 Minutes tomorrow evening. They want to do a feature story on corporate fraud and family businesses. I'll be the lead attorney representing all the families you've destroyed over the years." Marcus sank into his chair, his head in his hands. "This is insane. There has to be a way to fix this, to make it go away. The only way to make it go away would be to go back in time and not commit the crimes in the first place," I replied. "But since that's impossible, you're going to have to face the consequences of your actions. All of you." Victoria looked up from her tears, mascara streaking down her cheeks. "What do you mean, all of us? I never did anything wrong." "Didn't you?" I pulled out another file, one I'd been saving for this exact moment. "Victoria, where do you think the money for your wedding came from? That $200,000 reception at the Four Seasons? The honeymoon in Europe? Your house in Bellevue Hills?" Her face went white. "Those were gifts from Mom and Dad. Gifts bought with stolen money. The IRS is very interested in unexplained large cash gifts, especially when they can be traced back to fraudulent business activities. You might want to call David and warn him that his wife is about to become a liability to his career at Microsoft." My mother was clutching the back of her chair, so tightly her knuckles were white. "You planned this. All of it. You've been planning to destroy us for months." "Actually, Mom, I've been planning to get justice for months. The destruction is just a happy side effect." I closed my briefcase with a satisfying snap. "And speaking of justice, there's one more thing you should know." This was it, the final revelation that would make my victory complete. The moment I'd been building toward since I'd opened that manila envelope weeks ago. The Russo family didn't just hire me to represent them in the civil suit. They made me a partner in the new business they're starting with the assets they'll recover from you. It turns out that Maria Russo's granddaughter graduated from culinary school last year, and she's been dreaming of restoring her family's legacy. I smiled as I saw understanding dawn in my parents' eyes. We're calling it Russo and Brooks Catering, combining the Russo family's authentic recipes and reputation with my legal expertise and business connections. All those clients you stole over the years, they're very interested in supporting a business that represents truth and integrity rather than fraud and deception. My father's face was a mask of fury and disbelief. You're going into business with them? After everything we've given you? You've given me nothing but humiliation and dismissal, I replied. But the Russo family has given me something you never could: respect, partnership, and the chance to build something honest and legitimate. The transformation in the room was complete. The elegant dining room that had hosted so many celebrations of Brooks' family success now felt like a mausoleum, filled with the ghosts of destroyed dreams and stolen accomplishments. The crystal still sparkled under the chandelier, but it seemed tarnished now, like everything else my parents had touched. Maria's granddaughter, Isabella, is brilliant, I continued, savoring the look of defeat on my parents' faces. She spent years researching her family's original recipes, the ones you stole and passed off as your own signature dishes. When we launch Russo and Brooks, we'll be serving authentic Italian cuisine with a story of redemption that will resonate with every client in the city. Marcus looked up from his hands, his business mind still functioning despite the chaos. The non-compete agreements are null and void when they're based on fraudulent activities, I finished. In fact, the court will probably order Mom and Dad to transfer their entire client list to the Russo family as part of the restitution. Every wedding, every corporate event, every social gathering they've ever catered will become our potential business. Victoria was hyperventilating again. This is a nightmare. This can't be happening. Oh, but it is happening, Victoria. And the best part is, it's just the beginning. I walked toward the dining room doorway, then turned back for one final moment. You see, I've learned something very important tonight. Success isn't about being handed a place at someone else's table. It's about building your own table and choosing who gets to sit at it. I gestured around the ruined dinner party. And looking at this table, built on lies, decorated with stolen achievements, and occupied by people who value appearance over integrity, I realized I never wanted to sit here in the first place. The manila envelope had been the key that unlocked everything, but the real power had always been inside me. The education they'd dismissed, the career they'd minimized, the principles they'd mocked. Those were the tools I'd used to bring them down and build myself up. The eviction notice gives you 30 days to vacate the premises, I said, my hand on the doorframe. I suggest you use that time wisely. The FBI will want to interview all of you, and I'm sure you'll want to retain legal counsel. Although you might have trouble finding anyone willing to represent you once word gets out about tonight. My mother made one last desperate attempt. Cassandra, please. We can fix this. We can make amends. Pay back what we owe. The time for making amends was 27 years ago, when you decided to steal from the Russo family. Or 20 years ago, when you could have confessed and made restitution. Or even last week, when you could have told me the truth instead of letting me discover it through legal documents. I paused at the threshold, looking back at the family that had never valued me. But you didn't do any of those things. Instead, you spent decades building a lie and convincing yourselves it was the truth. Well, tonight the truth came home to roost, and it's wearing my face. The final setup for the climax was complete. Tomorrow night, the whole world would know the Brooks family story, but it wouldn't be the version my parents had been telling for 20 years. It would be the true story, the one where justice prevailed, the underdog triumphed, and the family's greatest disappointment became their ultimate undoing. The next evening, I stood in the green room at the CBS affiliate in downtown Seattle, adjusting my navy blazer and checking my reflection one final time. In 30 minutes, I would be sitting across from correspondent Janet Morrison for what would become the most watched 60-minute segment in the Pacific Northwest history. But that wasn't the moment I'd been waiting for. That would come in exactly 4 hours, when the segment aired nationally and my parents would watch their complete destruction broadcast to 20 million viewers. The manila envelope sat on the table beside me, no longer containing secrets but serving as evidence in what the FBI was now calling Operation Family Recipe, one of the largest corporate fraud investigations in Washington state history. Special Agent Martinez had called that morning to inform me that my parents had been arrested at 6 a.m., charged with racketeering, conspiracy, tax evasion, and wire fraud spanning 2 decades. "Miss Brooks!" A production assistant appeared at the door. "We're ready for you." I walked onto the set with the confidence of someone who had spent months preparing for this moment. The studio lights were blinding, but I felt more clear-eyed than I had in years. This wasn't just an interview. It was my public vindication, broadcast to the world. "Tell us how this investigation began," Janet Morrison said after the introductions were complete, her penetrating gaze focused on my face. "It began with a simple manila envelope," I replied, holding up the now-famous document. An eviction notice that arrived at my law office, addressed to me as the registered agent for my parents' catering company. What I discovered when I started investigating that notice was a 27-year conspiracy that destroyed multiple families and built an empire on stolen dreams. The cameras captured every word as I laid out the evidence methodically: the forged documents, the fraudulent insurance claims, the systematic destruction of the Russo family business. But the most powerful moment came when I revealed the personal cost. For 34 years, my parents told me I didn't belong at their table. I said, my voice steady despite the emotion behind the words. They were right. I belonged at a table built on truth, integrity, and justice, everything their table lacked. Janet leaned forward. "Your parents built a successful business that employed dozens of people and served Seattle's elite for over 20 years. Some viewers might wonder if your actions were motivated by personal revenge rather than justice." I had been waiting for this question. "My parents didn't build anything," I replied firmly. "They stole a successful business from the Russo family, destroyed the lives of multiple families, and spent decades covering their tracks. The only thing they built was a house of cards, and houses of cards always fall eventually." The interview continued for 45 minutes, but I knew the moment that would become the soundbite heard around the world. When Janet asked about my future plans, I smiled with genuine satisfaction. "Isabella Russo and I are launching our new catering company next month. We're calling it Russo and Brooks, combining her family's authentic recipes with my legal expertise. We've already booked 15 events, including 3 that were originally scheduled with my parents' company before their arrests." As I left the studio, my phone was already buzzing with interview requests from every major news outlet in the country. The story had everything: family drama, corporate fraud, and a David versus Goliath narrative that would captivate audiences for weeks. But the most satisfying call came at 9:47 p.m., exactly 17 minutes after the segment finished airing on the West Coast. "You vindictive bitch!" My father's voice was barely recognizable, distorted by rage and desperation. "You've destroyed everything we worked for." "No, Dad," I replied calmly, standing in my downtown apartment with the Seattle skyline sparkling beyond my windows. "You destroyed everything you worked for the day you decided to steal from the Russo family." I just made sure the truth finally came to light. "We're your parents," he shouted. "How could you do this to your own family? The same way you did it to the Russo family, the Chun family, the Johnson family, and all the others. The only difference is that my actions were legal and yours weren't." I could hear my mother crying in the background, but I felt no sympathy. They had made their choices 27 years ago, and tonight those choices had finally caught up with them. The harsh phrase came naturally: "You're nothing but thieves and fraudsters who got exactly what you deserved." 3 months later, I stood in the kitchen of our new catering facility, watching Isabella Russo put the finishing touches on a wedding cake that would have made her great-grandmother proud. The space was everything our partnership represented: authentic, honest, and built on a foundation of truth rather than deception. "The Morrison wedding is going to be spectacular," Isabella said, stepping back to admire her work. 300 guests, all eager to support the business that brought down the Brooks fraud empire. I smiled at the irony. Janet Morrison, the 60 Minutes correspondent who had interviewed me, was getting married, and she specifically requested Russo and Brooks catering for her reception. I want to support a business that represents integrity, she told me when she called. Plus, I'm curious to taste those authentic recipes your parents tried to steal. The past 3 months have been a whirlwind of media attention, new clients, and legal proceedings. My parents had pled guilty to all charges in exchange for reduced sentences, 12 years each in federal prison, plus restitution to all the families they defrauded. The judge had been particularly harsh during sentencing, calling their crimes a betrayal of trust that strikes at the heart of the American dream. Marcus had filed for bankruptcy after losing his position at Brooks and Associates and facing tax liens on assets purchased with fraudulent funds. Victoria's marriage was hanging by a thread, with David facing scrutiny from Microsoft's ethics board about his wife's family connections. Neither of my siblings had spoken to me since that Christmas dinner, but I felt no regret. I had chosen justice over family loyalty, and it had been the right choice. The Russo family's vindication had been complete and public. Isabella's grandfather, who had died believing his family's legacy was lost forever, had been posthumously honored by the Seattle Small Business Association. The original Russo's kitchen recipes were now featured in a cookbook that had become a bestseller, with all proceeds going to support other families victimized by corporate fraud. Ms. Brooks! My assistant appeared in the doorway. The Seattle Times is here for the 3-month anniversary interview. I straightened my chef's coat. Yes, I traded my lawyer's suits for kitchen attire on cooking days, and walked toward the dining room where the reporter was waiting. The space was elegant but warm, decorated with photographs of the Russo family's original restaurant and awards we'd won in our brief existence. Cassandra Brooks, the reporter said, rising to shake my hand, or should I say, the most famous whistleblower in Seattle history. Just call me Cassie, I replied, settling into the chair across from him. Though I prefer to think of myself as a small business owner who happens to have a law degree. Let's talk about the transformation. 3 months ago, you were serving drinks at your parents' dinner party. Today, you're running one of the most successful catering companies in the city. How does that feel? I considered the question carefully. It feels like I finally found my place at the right table. 4 years, I tried to earn acceptance at a table built on lies. Now I'm sitting at a table I helped build, surrounded by people who value truth and integrity. Any regrets about exposing your own family? None whatsoever. The only regret I have is that it took me so long to act. If I'd investigated sooner, maybe some of the other families they defrauded could have been spared years of financial hardship. As the interview concluded, I walked the reporter to the door, then returned to the kitchen where Isabella was preparing for the evening's event. We worked side by side in comfortable silence, 2 women who had found strength in each other's partnership and purpose in restoring justice to the Seattle catering scene. My phone buzzed with a text from Agent Martinez. Final restitution payments processed today. All victims have been compensated. Well done, counselor. I looked around the kitchen, our kitchen, built with honest money and authentic recipes, and felt a satisfaction deeper than anything I'd ever experienced at my parents' table. This was what success looked like when it wasn't stolen from someone else. The evening sun streamed through the windows, casting golden light on the stainless steel surfaces and fresh ingredients that would become tomorrow's celebrations. In a few hours, we'd be serving 300 guests at the Morrison wedding, and each dish would tell a story of redemption, justice, and the power of truth to transform lives. As I tied my apron and prepared for another successful evening, I couldn't help but smile. My parents had been right about one thing. I didn't belong at their table. I belonged somewhere much better, somewhere I'd earned my place through courage, integrity, and the willingness to do what was right, even when it was hard. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what's right? I'd love to hear your story, because sometimes the hardest battles we fight are the ones that matter most.